Um, First of all, this is a book here. It's called Voices from Donbas. I was lucky enough to visit Donbas on 3 occasions, and as part of kind of being there and meeting people and getting an introduction to the subject, I decided to write the book because I think it's important that people have as much information as possible as to what's happening in the conflict in the Donbas between the Ukraine and the Russian Federation. And just a wee bit of background, I was at the World Federation Trade Union Conference in Damascus in 2017, and from that I met a trade unionist there who lived in Lugansk, in the capital of that breakaway republic, and he was telling me the story of what it was like to live under a bombardment from the Ukrainian armed forces. He gave me a bit of the history, and in the following year he invited me to come along. So I visited Donbas in 2018. So I am going to explain to the best of my ability what he would say if he was here. So what I'm going to talk about is my experience, the conversations I had, what I saw when I was there, but also what the people there told me. So the first thing that someone from eastern Ukraine, from the Donbas region, that would be the Crimea, Lugansk Republic and Donetsk, they'll tell you that they were Ukrainian citizens who spoke Russian and had the Russian Orthodox religion as their chosen faith. They would tell you that they didn't leave Ukraine, Ukraine left them. So to follow that line of thinking and that lineage forward to where we are today, a lot of people think that the conflict or the war in Donbas started on the 22nd of February 2022 with a special military operation conducted by the Russian armed forces. But if you put it in context, you have to ask yourself, well, why did the Russians go in? Some people on the left will claim it's imperialist Russia flexing their military muscle and invading other countries with no reason and no other idea other than expanding the Russian Federation. But the truth of it really comes down to 2014, and it actually goes back before that. And if we actually go back, we could go back to 1990 and the fall of the Berlin Wall. So apparently there were what would you call them? There were assurances given by the American administration to the Russian administration that with the fall of the Berlin Wall, NATO would not move 1 inch east towards Russia, okay? But in the preceding years, from the fall of Russia in 1991, all we have seen is a consecutive move from both the EU and from NATO into what were many of the former, still are, Baltic nations like Lithuania and Slovenia and Slovakia and Romania, and take your pick. So with the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was promises that NATO wouldn't expand. With the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, then there was the disbandment of the Soviet Warsaw Pact, and there was also the disbandment of the Soviet Union into its constituent parts, all those sovereign independent countries. So if you fast forward then between 1991 and 2014, there was no military conflict between Russia and the Ukraine. And there was no real military conflict between Russia and any of the other previous Soviet satellite countries, with maybe the exception of Georgia. But in 2014, I watched the television. I heard that there was a popular revolution against the government. I heard that people wanted to join the EU and the government wanted to remain neutral and aligned possibly to Russia. And the popular revolution was just peaceful street protests that were attacked by the government, which led to a reaction from the peaceful protesters to start a violent resistance to governmental oppression. But in 2014, we had Joe Biden as the American Vice President, and this will be very important in my mind as we go forward. Joe Biden was the American Vice President to Barack Obama, and Victoria Nuland was the ambassador for America in Ukraine. She not only publicly supported the protests, She gave out cookies in Maidan Square, and after the Maidan Square coup, which subsequently followed the protests, they had the Americans then claimed that they spent $5 billion to bring the coup about. There is speculation that they armed people in the background, that they financed the revolutionaries, and indeed they used the right-wing fascist elements that still exist across the world, but the ones in the Ukraine, as the foot soldiers and as the stormtroopers for the coup in 2014. So you had Lukashenko, who was the elected president. So you had a democratically elected president who refused to move towards the EU, and as such, he wanted the country to remain neutral. Because the EU, the West, and America wanted Ukraine to become part of NATO and also part of the EU, they helped to destabilise the country. They set about the coup, and then from that, you had Lukashenko had to flee. Now, I spoke to the guys who were there, and they said he was under death threat from the likes of the right-wing Azov battalion, and when he fled to Russia in order to protect his life, he ended up in a field at night, and his security guards had a torch, and they used the torch as a signal for the Russian helicopter rescue group to come in and take him out of the country. So the democratically elected president was ousted in what I would believe, and what the people in eastern Donbas, eastern Ukraine, would tell you was a right-wing, fascist-led, Western-inspired finance coup. They put in then Poroshenko. He became the next elected president. And then in 2019, Zelensky was elected, and he was elected on the promise that he would reunify the country and possibly there were talks around allowing both Lugansk and Donetsk to become autonomous regions, so they would have their own parliament but still be within the Ukraine. And that's where the Minsk agreements 1 and 2 were negotiated and agreed in Minsk in Belarus. And those guarantees that peace deal as such for going forward, the end of violence that had broken out in 2014, the idea of that was backed and guaranteed by both France and both Germany. So Angela Merkel and whoever was the French president at the time, they were going to be guarantors that Russia would play its part and that the people in Kiev would play their part too. So it's transpired. Angela Merkel has said that they never intended to implement the Minsk agreements. And between the years of 2014 and the special military operation of February 2022, what they did was build up the Ukrainian armed forces. They had, 600,000 men or something, with a huge number of men under arms, being trained by the West, being trained in Poland, being trained in Germany. They're now trained in Britain and other European countries. As we all know, all the weapons that have been sent into Ukraine are all from the West. What turned out to be what you could describe as a civil war in Donbas has then extended into a proxy war against Russia. One of the major things that people pointed out to me in 2014 was that if you live in a democratic state and your president is ousted in a right-wing coup, which leads then to people deciding whether they have a choice as citizens to live under the new administration or to say, not in our name, we don't support a coup in our country. And what they did was then they started to peacefully protest on the streets, and that was met with military repression from the Ukrainian armed forces from Kiev. So there's videos of tanks driving through Donbas, Donetsk and Luhansk, the capital. And the people there feel, as I've already said, they didn't leave Ukraine. They are Russian-speaking Ukrainians born and bred in Ukraine. It wasn't an issue until the Maidan Square coup in 2014. Those people decided, we're not living under a coup, we want to have autonomy. They set up their own defensive units and proceeded to try and, I suppose, not liberate, but to set up areas where the people felt safe and secure, and they felt that they had somewhere where they could defend themselves, because they felt that the government wasn't defending them. They also felt that some of the laws brought out, they banned Russian Orthodox churches. Russian Orthodox churches have been attacked. The priests have been thrown out. The priests have been attacked in the streets. At the moment, there are two members of the Communist Party in Ukraine, two brothers, I have their names here. They were arrested, they've been put in jail, and they're under threat of execution for no other reason than they are members and leaders of the Communist Party. In March 2022, Zelensky banned 11 opposition parties, including a party, I'm just trying to find it in here. There is a party, I think it's the Life Party it's called. It has 44 seats in what used to be, I assume, the Duma there in Kiev, and they have been banned. So I'm assuming they're not going to be able to stand in future elections. So we have a narrative of Russian imperialism attacking the Ukraine, and we have a narrative of people fighting for their very lives and their very existence within Ukraine. And one or two other things I want to touch on really are the massacre in Odessa. Now, I think that was on May Day in 2014, but I'm willing to be corrected on that. And this is when you had pro-Maidan and anti-Maidan camps in the Ukraine, okay? So the anti-Maidan coup camp was made up of people from the left. It was made up from people from the trade unions. And they were attacked by a group of right-wing Ukrainians and some ultra football fans who had come into the city in order to have a counter demonstration. They attacked the people who were involved in the anti-Maidan camp, and those people decamped for safety into the trade union building. That trade union building, there were claims that the people were chased inside, they were followed inside, and people were beaten and some were murdered prior to the building being set on fire. The people who were attacking these anti-Maidan protesters blocked the doors, set the building on fire, and apparently cheered when some of the people jumped from 4 or 5 stories up, trying to escape the flames. So two narratives and two sides to every story, but if I just pick a couple of things, not at random, because I've tried to do a wee bit of research just before this. Kiev was originally the capital of Russia. When the Russian nation, sovereign nation, was first formed, Kiev was the capital before they moved to Moscow. And the other thing is, I just want to chat briefly about Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera was he's born into a Ukrainian, I think he was born in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and his parents, he was involved in the Orthodox Greek Ukrainian church. He was actually, give me 2 seconds to find this, he helped form the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. He was born in Galicia. He was sentenced to death for his involvement in the assassination of the Polish Interior Minister, which was committed to life. So the guy was sentenced to death. He was released in 1939 when the Germans invaded Poland. He was freed in 1939. He was then rearrested by the Gestapo in 1941 because he made a proclamation about the independence of Ukraine. So the Gestapo locked him up in 1941. They then released him in 1944 because the Red Army was on the march towards Berlin, and the Germans and the Nazis needed every single fellow traveller to come to their aid. So in 1944, as part of the Second World War, I believe there were 1 million Polish people murdered by the Ukrainian fascists, and many Jews, over something like 150,000 Jews disappeared off into the death camps. So this man in 2010 was given the honour of the hero of Ukraine. So in 2010, a man who'd been sentenced to death for possible assassination and arrested by the Gestapo. He's maybe too far right for the Gestapo at the end of the day. But he ended up being a member of, if not forming, this organisation of Ukrainian nationalists. And that was actually used, I think NATO was formed in 1949. That organisation and Bandera were actually used after that to try and destabilise Ukraine. And many of those fascists have lived on. So fascism didn't die at the end of the Second World War. Under the Soviet Union, it was repressed in all our nations because 27 million Russians had died fighting German fascism in the Second World War. And if you look at East Germany, that became the Democratic Republic of East Germany, and it became a socialist state. And it denazified the country, whereas Germany and NATO was actually led by people who were senior members of the Nazi administration. So I think I might just leave it there and maybe just talk about the book for 2 seconds and my involvement there. So I've been to the Donbas. Not a problem. I've been to the Donbas on 3 separate occasions. So I've been to the capital Lugansk. I've been to the capital of Donetsk. I've stood on a bridge. I've got photographs in the book. There was a bridge that went between a part of, I think it's Donetsk, into the part of western Ukraine that had been damaged, and they weren't allowing people to fully access. If you imagine in any of these wars, families are divided, people can't get to their workplaces. It's a very, very, very sad set of affairs. Ideally, if they had instituted the Minsk Agreements 1 and 2, we wouldn't be in the position we were in. And when the special military operation began in February 22, if people remember, in March there was like a peace deal on the table between Zelensky and Putin, and Boris Johnson, people believe, was sent by Joe Biden to Kiev in order to say no, there will be no capitulation, there will be no surrender to the Russians. And the the Ukrainians and the Russians are both dying in huge numbers in order for America, which I believe has now failed, to destroy the economy and the political setup in Russia, because they want to balkanize Russia. There's plans to have it balkanized into 9 separate states, and then the West would go in and have privatization of the gas and the oil and the electricity and the water and all the companies that go along with that. So I'll leave it at that. I know it's a divisive issue. Maybe just one last thing. This rose here is actually what I have on the front of the book. This was given to me by a member of the Donetsk Foreign Office. This is made from Ukrainian shells. So they have thousands of these, trying to turn the spent Ukrainian NATO US ammunition into peace symbols. So I'll leave it at that. If anyone's any questions, you're more than welcome to thank you. I'll maybe stop recording here and then just people can chat.